The devastation of Kherson, a vital dam in the Ukrainian city, is bombed hours after the Russian withdrawal. The city now has no water, electricity or heating. Ukraine says infrastructure was destroyed by departing Russian troops. Despite celebrations in the streets, the country's president warns the situation facing Kherson's residents is grim.
Russian forces everywhere have the same goal, mockery of people as much as possible. But we will restore everything, believe me.
Also on tonight's programme. Spending cuts of £35 billion are expected from the Chancellor in Thursday's autumn statement, along with plans to raise billions in tax in the coming years.
Players have, but for how much longer? And Holmes and chasing it, and Flula chasing it. Flula off the floor, New Zealand.
And New Zealand beat England to win the Rugby World Cup in front of a record crowd for the women's game. Hello and good evening. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has said Russian troops destroyed all the critical infrastructure in Kherson, including water, heating and electricity, before they abandoned the city. Ukrainian officials have imposed a curfew there because of what they say is a continuing security threat. Ukraine regained control of Kherson after Moscow said 30,000 Russian troops were pulled out of the area yesterday, although sources close to President Zelensky have warned that the Kremlin's forces are making new fortifications on the left bank of the Dnipro River. And there is also huge concern after satellite images show significant damage to a major dam in the area. Our correspondent James Waterhouse sent this report from Odessa in Ukraine.
36 miles north of Kherson is a reminder that liberation is rarely simple. This is the Kakhovka Dam, one of Ukraine's biggest hydroelectric power plants. It's not clear who did this. A section's clearly been destroyed. If it collapsed, more than 80 locations would be flooded, including Kherson. For now, the city is full of relief and celebration. The sight of Ukrainian soldiers marks the end of 8 months of Russian occupation. Recovery will take longer.
Before fleeing from Kherson, the occupiers destroyed all critical infrastructure: communication, water supply, heat, electricity. Russian forces everywhere have the same goal, mockery of people as much as possible. But we will restore everything, believe me.
Russian forces may have retreated across the Dnipro River, but they haven't gone away.
We have been warned yesterday by our general staff of the Ukrainian Armed Forces that Russians are making new fortifications on the left bank side of the Dnieper River, and there is a likelihood of massive artillery shelling.
At a Southeast Asia summit in Cambodia, a warning that other countries could follow in Russia's footsteps if nothing is done.
Violation of borders, use of force, committing mass atrocities against civilian population. If anyone in the world sees that Russia can get away easily with all of this, then this someone will be tempted to follow the suit.
Ukraine forcing Russia out completely is still a long way off. But in a war which brings more bad news than good, this is a country savouring Kherson's liberation. James Waterhouse, BBC News, Odessa.
Well, our international editor Jeremy Bowen is in Ukraine, and he sent us this update just a little earlier from the road into Kherson.
The Ukrainians have got a lot to celebrate because they've scored a major victory over the Russians much more quickly and smoothly than they expected. And while the Russians have left behind them a great deal of damage, for now the Ukrainians aren't focusing on that because they believe they've taken a giant step forward to victory. Now, they will have to deal with a changed strategic situation, because by withdrawing across the river, the Russians have stabilized this section of the front, and they say they've taken more than 30,000 troops out with them. Those are troops who could have been killed fighting to stay in Kherson, who now can be deployed elsewhere. So that is why Ukraine will continue to push NATO for more and better weapons for the battles they face in the forthcoming winter months.
Jeremy Bowen in Ukraine. The BBC understands that spending cuts of about £35 billion are expected to be set out in Thursday's autumn statement, along with plans to raise about £20 billion in tax in the coming years. Let's find out more from our political correspondent, Ben Wright, who is at Westminster for us tonight. So what are we expecting, Ben?
Well, Jane, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, has already warned of the eye-wateringly difficult choices that he's going to have to make next week. Taxes are going to go up and public spending is going to be squeezed as the Chancellor tries to plug a huge hole in the public finances and convince financial markets that the government has a credible plan for bringing down the country's debt. Now, we'll of course have to wait for the Chancellor to deliver his statement on Thursday to see the details, but sources close to the spreadsheets are giving us some steer about what to expect. First, on taxes. The government does not want to raise taxes directly, but the Treasury can raise billions of pounds a year by keeping thresholds and allowances where they are. So as people's wages rise, the Treasury coins in a lot more cash, and it's expected that income tax thresholds could be frozen until 2028. Sources are also indicating that the highest earners who pay the top rate of tax, 45p top rate of tax, could start paying that when they're earning £125,000 a year rather than £150,000 a year as they do now. On public spending, government departments are being told to expect no extra cash until 2025, even though their budgets are being eaten away by inflation at the moment. Beyond that, the Treasury is thinking about raising spending by about 1% a year, which is not very much. As I said, we would expect all these details, of course, to be confirmed on Thursday in what will be the defining economic and political moment for Rishi Sunak's government.
Ben, thank you very much. Ben Wright at Westminster. And just to tell you, you can hear more about all of that tomorrow morning because Laura Kuenssberg will be here at 9, of course, on BBC One. And tomorrow she'll be joined by the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, and the Shadow Chancellor, Rachel Reeves. The BBC has calculated that the number of people who've crossed the Channel in small boats this year has now surpassed 40,000, the biggest number since records began in 2018. Just over 28,000 people made the same journey last year. Our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Samford is with me, and so that figure, Daniel, is a milestone of sorts.
Another difficult milestone for ministers. It's worth remembering that back in 2018, when this all began, fewer than 300 people crossed the Channel in these dangerous, open, small boats. But if you look at this graphic, you'll see that every year since then, the numbers have gone up and up and up and up. Last year, as you say, it was 28,500. Last night, it was just 50 short of 40,000. But we saw today far more than 100 people crossing in small boats. So that has definitely been surpassed. When the official figures come out tomorrow, it'll definitely be over 40,000. And it's worth remembering that in the last 2 months of last year, more than 8,000 people crossed. So by the end of this year, we could have got closer to 50,000 than 40,000.
And so why is this intractable?
Well, it's very, very, very difficult to stop is the simple answer. And it's very difficult for ministers because it's clear to some people that they're unable to control their southern coast, and also there's obviously a great risk to the people making the crossing. The French rescue services plucked 120 people from the Channel last night, and it's worth remembering that last November 27 people died in a single night. The bad weather of the last couple of weeks has allowed the government to reduce the numbers in the migrant processing centre at Manston, so that's become a little bit more under control, but they only did that by moving people out into hotels. That's causing concern in some local communities and concern about the millions of pounds being spent every day on hotel rooms. The Home Office said tonight that it was using every tool at its disposal to disrupt this trade across the Channel. There is a deal in the offing with the French, but that's only really about more patrols on the beaches, and that hasn't really had a huge effect so far. The only thing that's really stopping migrants crossing the Channel at the moment is bad weather.
Daniel, many thanks, Daniel Samford. We'll take a look at some of today's other stories. In the US, following Tuesday's midterm elections, the Democrats have inched closer to keeping control of the Senate with a win in Arizona. Mark Kelly has beaten the Republican candidate, Blake Masters, which would mean President Biden's party needs one more seat to have a majority. Votes are still being counted in Nevada. Georgia is expected to hold a runoff election next month. A cruise ship hit by COVID-19 has docked in Sydney in Australia. About 800 passengers on board the Majestic Princess, which had sailed from New Zealand, have the virus. Nearly 20% of everyone on board. People who've tested positive are being taken off the ship to complete their isolation in accommodation elsewhere. Keith Levine, a founding member of The Clash and later guitarist for Public Image Limited, has died at the age of 65 from liver cancer. Levine founded The Clash with Mick Jones in the 1970s, but he left the band before it became successful. He then joined Public Image Limited, the post-punk band set up by John Lydon after he left the Sex Pistols. Now, it's been a very busy day in the world of sport as well, so let's take a chance to take a look at all the latest sports news. Carthy Gnanasegaram has that for us. Evening, Carthy.
Evening, Jane. It has been very busy and it has been a bruising day for England's rugby fans in both codes. Rugby League in a moment, but we'll start with Rugby Union because England's women were beaten by hosts and defending champions New Zealand in a thrilling World Cup final in front of an ecstatic and record-breaking Eden Park crowd. More than 42,000 fans cheered New Zealand on to a 34 points to 31 World Cup win. Joe Curry reports.
It's an all-black night in Auckland.
Battered and bruised, the unbeatables beaten. For some of these players, the too familiar tears of World Cup heartache. Fans were turning up to see the world number ones England, unbeaten in over 30 games, face a team who broke their hearts 5 years ago.
We landed yesterday and the final is today and we fly home tomorrow.
Being held on the other side of the world means not many England fans have been able to make the trip across. It could feel like they're not just taking on 15 players on the pitch, but an entire stadium.
If England had nerves, they didn't show. A dream start, which continued as England quickly built up a healthy lead before a moment which would change the game.
Oh my goodness.
Lydia Thompson's reckless tackle, and she was shown a red card. The Black Ferns made use of their extra player almost immediately, but England regathered and dotted down twice. There was a change of ends, but no change of pace.
Huge moment in the World Cup final.
England looked to their driving maul, and once again it proved unstoppable. Amy Cockayne with a hat-trick of tries as the lead changed hands once again. But the Black Ferns still had magic up their sleeve. A perfect kick and some quick thinking as they set up a nail-biting finish. But as the final whistle went, those hopes were over.
Sport's pretty cruel and it doesn't always go the way you want, and it's won on lost and fine margins, and that's certainly what happened this evening.
England came to New Zealand as heavy favourites, but they leave with only questions about how this trophy got away from them once again. Joe Curry, BBC News, Auckland.
There was also drama and disappointment for England's men's team, defeated in their Rugby League World Cup semi-final by Samoa. A golden point drop goal decided the game and sends Samoa into their first World Cup final. Adam Wild reports from the Emirates Stadium.
Up close, personal, here was England's challenge. A Samoan battle cry for the ages, but behind the passion, a purpose. England had already beaten Samoa once at this tournament, but now the stakes are higher, the opposition stronger. Tim Lafai racing in, and England were behind. A rivalry turned on its head, for Tom Burgess, quite literally. Liggy Sow's try gave Samoa the lead at the break. England, for the first time at this World Cup, struggling. A Samoa side reborn, revitalised. Stephen Crichton's interception looked certain to have won it. England and their stunned fans could only watch on. Seconds remaining, England with a final chance, a breakaway. Herbie Farnworth restoring a hope that had all but vanished. 26 all. Now the dreaded golden point. Next score wins it. An almost unbearable tension. But when the ball fell once more to Crichton, this was Samoa's moment.
Samoa into the final of the Rugby League World Cup.
So after all the hope, the heartbreak, this is England's World Cup, but it's them that are going home. Adam Wilde, BBC News at the Emirates Stadium.
Great Britain's team at tennis's Billie Jean King Cup had exceeded expectations by reaching the semi-finals of the competition for the first time in 41 years. But their surprise run came to an end after a tense deciding doubles match against Australia. With the match level after the two singles ties, Olivia Nichols and Alicia Barnett lost the doubles after every set went to a tiebreak in Glasgow. It really has been a busy day of sport, so there's plenty more on the BBC Sport website, including the Premier League and Scottish Premiership results in their last weekend of games before the Qatar World Cup, plus news of Rugby Union's Autumn Nations series, and England face Pakistan in the Men's T20 Cricket World Cup final in a few hours' time, Jane.
Thanks so much, Karthi Gnanasegaram. And that is it from the team for tonight. Hope you have a very good night. Bye-bye.